Okay, it's our appointed time. Welcome all of y'all to the Higher Education Committee meeting today. We have a quorum. We're just glad to see everybody. I know there's lots of meetings going on. We have two bills. One's for a hearing, and one there could be action if the committee so desires. And House Bill 222 is one we'll have action on if you desire. It's LC 336803. Shaw Blackman is here to present the bill. If you'll come up, Shaw, on this end, you got a chair there you can pull out. And yes, sir, right there. And we'll get started. You are
Microphone
now.
hot here? All right, thank you.
Excuse me, committee, I almost forgot to make you aware that we have a very important person with us today. Over here, our whip, Christian Coomer, is with us today, and hope everybody, Chairman Dickey, to keep an eye on him and keep him in tow. And Representative, you hope good whip doesn't start asking questions.
I've been warned.
Duly warned. He is quite a good questioner. But without further ado, Representative, we'd love to hear House Bill 222.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As the chairman mentioned, bring before you House Bill 222, and I think some of you are aware that during the off-season there was a study committee assigned to review the various military installations across the state and come up with a list of recommendations. One of those recommendations is basically listed in this particular piece of legislation. So all that it is designed to do and intended to do, we have the, I guess, 5 branches of military service that currently have access to HOPE in this state, and that's scholarship and grant. And what this would do is add, if you're a member of the Georgia National Guard or a member of the reserve component of the armed forces located in Georgia, then you would also have access to the HOPE scholarship or the HOPE grant in the same manner. Mr. Chairman, I would be more than happy to entertain any questions that you have.
Representative, also, committee, if you look in your file, you'll see a fiscal note, and that goes along with this bill, because this would affect HOPE scholarship and grants, as you can imagine. And I'm just going to pause for a minute, if you would, just take just a few minutes and kind of read over it. Does everybody have one? It says the Department of Audits, right there. Yes, the one you have. Yes, sir, Mr. Representative. Okay. You got 4 of them?
I think everybody's folded.
Well, we just want to make sure we cover it.
You're loaded for bear, I see.
Well,
Mr. Chairman, may I also add that all the members of the committee did sign this particular bill, the Military Affairs Study Committee, which working group, and so therefore, it obviously is supported by that initiative.
If you want to, if there's anything.
I mean,
This way. Okay, y'all good? Does anyone have any questions on the audit that's before you? Oh, Ms. Marie, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Blackman, I have one question to ask you. Who are some of the members on this study committee?
What were some of the members?
Who were
Who-
who were some of the members on the study committee?
I can give you the entire committee if you like, Madam Representative. Good question. Our chair was Representative Dave Belton, and you have Representative Glanton, Chairman Bill Hitchens, Representative John Carson, Representative Brian Prince, Chairman Mike Chokas, Representative Chairman Ed Reinders, Representative David Clark, Chairman Richard Smith, Representative Heath Clark, Representative Calvin Smyrie, Representative John Corbett, Representative Al Williams, and Representative Darrell Elam.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you, Chairman Dickey, are you 2 or 3? 3.
Oh,
I think you're on. I think you're on. Yes, sir.
Thank you,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman. Representative Blackman, I just want to go over and make sure I understand, and I do, but I just want the committee or the audience to, what would be the benefit to the citizens of the state of Georgia for allowing these reservists and people to get use HOPE money for their education here, and why they're not entitled now to those funds?
Mr. Chairman, excellent question. I appreciate the question. I could not tell you why they are not entitled to them now. I would say that they, like other members of the military service, keep us safe and they're, defend our freedoms, and they're serving here in Georgia. And so with that we, would ask that they also be afforded this same option or opportunity. Doesn't answer your question. I don't detect I answered your question.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, are these people citizens? Are they going to stay here, or I mean, what's your
Well,
vision
obviously,
for-
it's a
for
workforce.
Why we, workforce.
Workforce issue, as always, when we're with respect to that. Yes, we would obviously like anybody that we educate and train here in the state of Georgia to stay here and participate in our workforce, and I think this would very much encourage such.
Okay, that was the answer.
Yes, sir.
thought.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Got a question here from Mr. Williams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Whoops.
See, am I on there?
You are.
Okay.
So-
My question is on the the Georgia National Guard. Prior to Desert Storm, the Georgia National Guardsmen don't get all the same benefits. Is this going to grandfather them in, that they would also receive these benefits also?
I'm not sure which benefits you're referring to, Mr. Representative. I would just outline that this is HOPE only.
Right. Well, any benefits, there's, I'm not sure that all of you are aware, but if you served in the National Guard prior to Desert Storm, you never got a DD-214. So you didn't have the correct paperwork to apply for veteran benefits, for housing, burial, funeral benefits, those type things. So that's some interest to me, because I'm working on making sure that the National Guardsmen, that we go back and grandfather them in and make sure. I just don't want them to be left out. I'm in favor of what you're doing, but I just want to make sure that we hear that in this committee, and we make sure that it's understood that any National Guard prior to Desert Storm or whenever would be eligible.
Representative Williams, I think it'd be sure something you need to look into with Legislative Council and see if there's a gap in that, and because I think everyone here would love to work to fix that gap.
Great,
I
thank you.
think this bill, Representative, yours is for active people who are active now. Is that not right?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it just said for any member of the Georgia National Guard. I didn't understand it said anyone that was active now. I just thought it might be someone who might be a veteran and want to go back and go to school or something.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
If obviously if they're a veteran and they're a resident of Georgia, then they would absolutely have access to the same.
Good, thank you.
Representative Chuck Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Blackman, looking lines 26 through
31, general, where seems to be the crux of the bill is, line 26, existing language being classified as a legal resident of Georgia. And then I guess the underlying language is the new language. And
Yes,
what
sir.
I'm wondering about is down on line 29 and 30, the end of line 29, and the active duty military service members stationed in Georgia, list Georgia as their home of record. Not being an attorney, I'm a little bit confused whether or not the reference there to active duty in any way conflicts with what you're trying to accomplish by adding guard and reserve. And again, maybe legal counsel would need to address that, but I just want to make sure that wasn't in conflict in any way, since there it refers just to active duty.
Well, yeah, it probably is a question for a legal mind of some sort. I would say that the term "or" is used there. You know, maybe worth pointing out that it is either or. It's not both. So, but legal resident is the way they work around. Basically, is the I guess the simplest fix here, and so it would designate these people as legal residents of the state of Georgia, and that's what qualifies them for the Hope Scholarship and Hope Grant.
Thank
Yes, sir.
Representative, do we know how many people this would affect? Do you have an estimate that, or an idea? I guess
Well-
because this has been brought for a reason. Someone's needs aren't being met, I would assume.
When you say someone's needs aren't being met,
Yeah,
you're
that-
talking about,
Someone falls into this category that we're trying to fix.
well, I think it's as much as anything is just, you know, us honoring their service, same way we would an active duty military. And obviously to the chairman's point that, you know, we would want to encourage their participation in our workforce here in Georgia should they decide to either exit or, you know, do something else within our state.
Oh, I think we agree. Mine was that, were there people who were in the Georgia National Guard or in reserve who were not able to? You know, we're trying to help them. I was just curious if there was a number that you had in back that you'd heard a reason.
No, sir. I mean, I think, you know, the number that's been listed here is 50, you know, on the scholarship and the, you know, is what the figures are. But I do not have a number that this would specifically impact. I don't think it, you know, trying to remember the exact language in the fiscal note, but I don't think it, you know, it's hard to determine or predict who might take advantage of this.
Yeah. Okay. Good deal.
Yes,
Any
sir.
other committee members have a question for the bill sponsor? I also want to call on our Chris Green from Georgia Student Finance. You know, they're the folks, you know, they stayed late with us the other day. Those folks who did will, Shaw, if you'll move over. Or
Yes,
just
sir,
sit, you can
absolutely.
sit beside him, or I'd just like for him to comment on this, what he's seen. You'll find we'll probably do that on all these bills that have fiscal notes, because these are the folks that finance it.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you. My name is Chris Green. I work for the Georgia Student Finance Commission. As an agency, we have no position on the bill, but I thought it might be helpful if I shared with you how we currently treat military personnel for Hope Scholarship purposes. So for Georgia residency, and this is only for Hope Scholarship or Hope Grant, military personnel, military spouses, or dependent children are treated as a Georgia resident for purposes of Hope Scholarship if one of two things occurs. Either the military personnel is stationed in Georgia on active duty or lists Georgia as his or her home of record. Or the other way is that the university system or the technical college system grants a military personnel out-of-state tuition waiver. Under either of those two circumstances, we would honor the student as being a Georgia resident. The fiscal note that's before you, Department of Defense and Georgia National Guard provided these numbers. The only thing our team provided was an estimate based on a dollar figure of what we're currently paying a military person. And so then based on the new people who may qualify under the proposed legislation, that is how Department of Audits put this together for you. But Mr. Chairman, that's really all I have for today. So.
I see some people reaching for buttons. Representative Casas, you're 9, I think.
That's correct, sir. Thank you,
sir.
Mr. Chairman. So, just for clarification, so the 50 that's on the fiscal note, is that just an arbitrary number to use to make estimates?
That is my understanding. I would really need
Okay.
to defer to audits. I'm sorry, we did not compile this fiscal note.
Okay, okay,
From Representative, what I've gathered, the 50 on the backside
yeah,
was a number just that we could use. It's 50
just,
for every new 50 individuals
gotcha.
receive a HOPE grant. will
So,
be
so we
s-
really don't know. We really don't
Yeah, we
know.
guessed we kind of looked at it, we just got this today, this
Right.
afternoon. We did a little rough estimate based on the front, on the second paragraph, that it'd be somewhere around $650,000. If all 483 people
I
did it,
see.
you would be somewhere in there. But then again, not all of them are gonna do that. Some are, some aren't. And,
Of course.
but that's kind of the
So that on the top end.
country math that we did
Right.
when we got this a little while ago.
So we're looking at it, the top end, an estimate would be over $500,000.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
I see another Representative Chandler.
Chris, are those waivers currently given to Guard members?
If they are on active duty or list Georgia as their home of record.
Only?
I can't speak to how big that population could be who is a National Guard's member that does not meet one of those two. And I apologize. I would need to
Okay.
defer to National Guard to help us with that.
Thank you.
Would the bill sponsor like to answer that? He looks like he has something to say. You might go to the microphone, would you please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. No, I was just going to reference here where it says we're unable to determine the number of reservists and Georgia-based units do not meet the state residency requirements. And I mean, I think that stands true for the Guardsmen as well. But in all likelihood, I think you would find a good bit of eligibility already within those ranks. Just stands to reason. But
Because you're on the bottom of the audit page is where he's.
yeah, the
referencing,
first
right?
audit page, the third bullet.
Good deal. 7. Representative Dubick. Go ahead.
Two quick questions for you.
Yes, sir.
A little bit to the point that was made earlier. Is this us being proactive, or do we have people kind of lined up requesting, saying, I'd like to be HOPE eligible?
I think we've got probably both components sort of in mind based on our meetings. You know, we had several during the, for lack of a better term, off-season between sessions for the study committee. And, you know, what we had heard was that obviously this would be, appreciated, but at the same time, we want to be proactive and go ahead and do this for anybody that has helped defend our country and our nation.
Fair enough. Second question, this may be a finance question. You talked about those members of active duty. Is there any requirement for the amount of time that they've been in Georgia, or is it simply if they're active duty and come into the state of Georgia?
Whatever the determination is from the university system, if they classify under one of those two, we would honor that and honor their decision.
From day one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Representative Holcomb, is that okay. There you go.
I want to drill down a little bit, and this is for the author, and I think it might be a little bit along the line of the questions from Chairman Dickey, and it's who is the class of people that this would help? Is it South Carolinians or residents of Alabama who serve in our Guard, and then they want to have the HOPE scholarship, and then the hope is someday they'll become Georgia residents and be part of our workforce? Or is it just a more altruistic motive of helping anyone who serves regardless of where they live and where they're going to continue to reside?
I think it would be a combination. I mean, I think obviously there's some altruism in what we're trying to accomplish here. I mean, I thank you for your service as well, Representative Holcomb. But I think what would be a workforce component would be an altruism component, and I think you're also probably looking at erring on the side of doing what's right, I think, by our servicemen and women.
Okay.
across the
Thanks.
board. I hope that answers your question
Yeah,
to some degree.
It does. It's clear to me in terms of what we already have of either active duty members who are in Georgia or those who have claimed Georgia as their home of record, and those who are Georgia citizens. And then this, it would seem, would expand it to those who live in other states but serve in the Georgia National Guard, Air Guard, or National Guard, and they may or may not come to our state permanently for long term. So it's not as clear a nexus, but I still appreciate what you're trying to do.
I think the other thing to consider, and I know we hear this a lot, but the fact that there may be dual residency is the wrong word, but they may live part of the time in Georgia and part of the time elsewhere. And they may have their permanent residence that they call in South Carolina or Alabama or Tennessee. But maybe they spend several months or a good bit of their time in Georgia for various reasons. I mean, we see Florida with no income tax and Tennessee with no income tax, and you may have some folks that do that, that leave their permanent residence there but live in Georgia. But I think they're contributing as part of the, potentially as part of the workforce here that we might need for the future.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sir, Mr. Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions, and the first one is to Mr. Green. Are you aware that members who receive a Montgomery GI Bill or post 9/11 GI Bill benefits are required to apply that benefit before they would receive HOPE scholarship benefits?
Yes, sir. I am somewhat familiar with what.
Okay, so this would just be secondary to those benefits they can already receive federally, and if that amount covers their full cost of tuition and fees, then even though they're eligible, they wouldn't actually receive any HOPE grant or scholarship money.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And my second question is to the author. Isn't it true, Mr. Blackman, that this is actually a recruiting and retention tool that the Guard has requested? Because, in fact, they do compete with Florida, South Carolina, and Alabama to recruit and retain Guard members.
That is absolutely correct, yes, sir.
And part of the competition and part of the factoring is that in Florida, they have a program that pays for full tuition for any Guard member who's in the Florida National Guard. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
And Alabama also has a generous scholarship program, and both
They
of those
do.
states have no state income tax for military members.
That is correct, yes, sir.
So this is an important part of the recruiting and retention puzzle that recruiters deal with. Is that correct?
You know of what you speak.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question.
Are you going to send him a Valentine or a thank you?
If it was a day earlier, you better believe it.
I
Yes,
think
sir,
you get him
Mr.
half price
Chairman.
today. I think so.
It always helps to have a reservist in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Whip, for your insight on that. Appreciate it a lot. Well, any other committee members have a question for our bill's author? Okay, at this moment, it's in the hands of the committee. If any, make a motion do pass with Chairman Dickey. A second. We got a second. Any discussion? Sorry, got. All those in favor of moving this on? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Like, nay. There's none, so it moves on. I've got a flashing light. Accidentally? Yeah. Okay.
I do thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate it.
You bet. You're welcome. Thank you, committee, and we'll move on. This is still a hearing, and this is a bill we're working on with the author, Representative Rathesberger. He's been in another meeting presenting another bill with Chairman Carter. You were there too? You were there too? Oh. Oh, well. Well, if you'll look in your folder, you'll, of course, see a sub. I really want to commend some of our committee members, Chairman Carter, Representative Costas, Representative Chandler, for working with the bill author in since our last meeting and refining what we've got before us today. And I sure appreciate you guys' extra work. Even on the weekend, I saw a number of emails going back and forth, and I sure appreciate what y'all are helping the author with. Representative, if you'll go ahead and just kind of give us the background.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure, are we on LC? We've had so many revisions, so LC 1430S?
My crack
Excellent.
staff has the right one in your folder.
Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you, committee, for allowing me to bring this back before you for a hearing. And I want to commend the Legislative Council. I told him I was going to wear him out. And we went through several different changes as we were discussing this. It's really, they say, Paul talks about, groaning with the Spirit, to try and get things right. And that's what we did. So what's before you today, we really talk about this. My goal at the end of the day is to have the people that are homeschooled primarily, right now they're at the 93rd percentile. And if you look at everyone else, like public school eligible high schools, they would be at a 1200 SAT or a 26 ACT. And that puts them at, for 81% for the SAT and 82, just because of but they're about 81% there. I think the goal was for them to be at 80%. So just to give you some historical background on that. And I just thought that 93% was just such a high hurdle. And they do have right now a look back in current law, but the challenge that you have is that some families are stressed financially. And so having to put the money out for school and then have their son or daughter, actually, bring in those grades that would make them eligible. But meanwhile, they're out the money, and so
I'm going to interrupt you just a second. Explain what you mean by look back, so
Well,
so the committee knows what you're.
Okay, in the current law as it's currently written, is that if you are graduate from an ineligible school, or if you are homeschooled, home study program, once you go to school and you get those grades, then you can apply for the Zell Miller and retroactively, receive the Zell Miller scholarship. And so the challenge that I have with that first of all, the hurdle right now is 93 percentile. And I felt that a test is a test, that the test is really not ask you, where did you go to school? And it really doesn't matter where you go. It's going to test, your knowledge of the material. But the other challenge is that when people, if people have means, it's not a financial burden for them. But if they don't have means, then they'll have gone for a whole semester before they could be eligible for the Zell Miller. So from the standpoint of equity, that's why I brought this bill forward. And so as we were talking about that, and we were talking about eligible and ineligible high school, I really felt that a 3.7 made sense for both eligible and ineligible, and 1200, because some schools are ineligible for reasons. Some schools could lose their accreditation. I think we had a county, I don't know if they lost it, but it certainly made the evening news that they were on the verge of losing it. So then they would have been an ineligible school, and yet those students could have been penalized through no fault of their own. The other times is that people don't really want to go through the accreditation process, but they're still, will turn out a high quality student. And so I thought if we did 3.7 and then the SAT being equal for both eligible and ineligible, that would make sense. And so that's what I did on line 15 through 21. Then we left line 22 as having graduated from eligible high school as a valedictorian or salutatorian. That is in current law, so there's no change there. And then we have for a home study program, we really just changing that so that if they would score a 1200 on their SAT, 26 on the ACT. And then by doing that, then really lines 31 through 41 would not be required. And so that's what we've been working on this past week through several different revisions. And I wanted to bring that forward today so we could have some more discussions about that. And I was hoping that, Chairman, you mentioned that the finance, all those initials, I always mess them up, but that they hadn't gotten back to you yet on what would be the fiscal impact with this change.
This is brand new, so we've just requested based on this. Committee members, questions or comments? I know the folks who've been working on it, Representative Chandler.
I don't know an answer, and we've discussed this. But before I say that, I want to say something else. I wish we'd get rid of eligible and ineligible, because all are eligible. It's accredited or unaccredited. I don't know why we use those terms. But anyway, I am troubled with the requirement for eligible students having a 1200 or a 26 and a 3.7, and I've shared all this with you. I have 5 grandchildren that were or are being homeschooled. I believe in homeschooling, but I'm a public school educator. And when I look at that requirement for eligible students, and I look at ineligible students only having to have a 1200 or a 26, I don't see that as equitable. But I also don't want to see, I would have a hard time rationalizing having a grade point average for ineligible students, simply because of my experience. I remember when Hope first came on board, I saw the pressure that was put on public school educators. If there was a 78 or a 79, parents were up at the school raising Cain. That's the only way I know to put it. And I know that parents are people, and if money's involved, and my child has a 79, but he needs an 80, it'd be mighty hard not to give him an 80. So I'm concerned about that discrepancy. I don't know an answer, except, as I've mentioned to Brad, the only answer I see, and this sounds fair to me, but it does not seem fair to other people. It would seem fair to me to require the ineligible student to have a little higher SAT or an ACT, not significantly, maybe like an 85th, which would actually be I believe it changes it to a 1240, looking at 2016 scores, a 1240 on the SAT, a 27 on the ACT. That to me seems a little more equitable.
Did you have a comment, Bill Arthur?
Representative Chandler and I have talked at length about that. Actually, I think the most equitable thing would just be pull out the grade point average completely and just go with a test score. And if 1200 isn't the right score, what is that score? And have that conversation. But that way then it just gets down to testing. But that would be perhaps too big of a bite for this session.
Okay, thank you. Representative Dreyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate what you said. That was actually the concern I was going to raise, Representative Chandler. And I do understand potentially it being too big a bite of an apple, but getting a 3.7 GPA is hard. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time, and there is something to be said for that accomplishment, whether it's in a public or a private school, right? I mean, I think at some of these private schools, that is a very difficult thing to achieve. So I think that's the way that balance was struck. And with removing the GPA requirement, which I understand and I think is very logical, but when I was asking around about this in the past week, it also came to my attention that folks generally from higher income homes do better on these type of tests because what they're exposed to. So another way is just grade point average. And you'll see folks from schools that aren't doing well at all can still exceed and excel at those schools and then would qualify for some additional aid. And one of our leaders, one of our representatives, Stacey Evans, was pretty upfront about the fact that her GPA was stellar, but the SAT score might not have gotten her the Zell Miller Scholarship. So I think that's right. That too. And I've seen interesting questions, such as what kind of shoes are these? And they showed ballet shoes. And I would say there's some kids in my district that have probably never seen ballet shoes, and that hurts on SAT and ACT type questions. So, you know, it's maybe too big a bite of an apple, but just to say it, if there was a way to provide these kind of scholarships for folks that did exceedingly well in GPA or exceedingly well in their SAT and ACT score, I think would be a good way to do that. But again, that's a money issue, isn't it?
Heard an echo. Cost factor. I heard the bleed. Who's number 9? Is that over here? Oh, Representative Casas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm going to echo a lot of that, and also to give the perspective. I was educated in the history of the Zell Miller Scholarship, in that it wanted to award that scholarship to students that excelled in both of those areas, a high GPA and a very good score on the SAT. Because am I understanding that the Zell Miller is apart from Hope? It's a separate.
Hope Scholarship and Zell, it's under the umbrella.
It's under the umbrella, but it's offered in this sense. And so I understand that, and I understand keeping the GPA there. Of course, also the cost factor tends to motivate a lot of these things. But I want to address again the issue of the test score, and I'm with Representative Chandler. I don't know what we could do here, but to require from a home study student a higher grade or a higher score on a standardized test in order to compensate for a high GPA, that seems inequitable to me. Because you're looking at families that are saying, my student is scoring a 1200, but I can't get this because I made a choice to home study them. And so I just want to leave that in the minds of the committee.
Thank you, Representative. I like the sigh. That's great. Any other committee members have a? I've also asked Chris Green if he would, from Georgia Student Finance, just her revolving. We're just have to give you a chair by yourself, right? You can just pull up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and to the bill author, I apologize. We have not gotten to connect on this issue just yet. I thought as an agency, we have no position on the bill. I thought I'd reiterate for you how home study students currently qualify for Zell. So just speaking about Zell, not Hope, score in the 75th percentile on the ACT or the SAT, get it on the front end as an entering freshman, or attend 30 semester hours, 45 quarter hours, keep that 3.3, and then have the 1200 to receive it retro. Now, of course, you've got the valedictorian, salutatorian, the regular 3.7 entry for other students. One point, and to Representative Chandler, certainly appreciate your passion with the eligible, ineligible. It's not quite as simple as accredited versus not accredited. With some more time, I'm sure I could ask our team to provide some more examples. But one that came to mind, a Georgia resident in a border county, is a Georgia citizen, but attends a private school across the border in a different state. And it is an accredited school, but by our code definition, that high school does not meet one of the accrediting groups we recommend. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all. And for the committee, I apologize. Something else I'd add. The reason we have a difficult time calculating this student population is because we only have data for students that apply for our program. So we don't know necessarily how many students are out there who fall between the proposed change and the current law. And so that's something we'd certainly want to continue working with you all on to estimate, perhaps.
You can hear Mr. Green echoing my questions because I kept asking him, how many do you think it is? And of course they don't know. And then the committee members have any questions for him? This very learned gentleman on this very technical subject. I've found him to be a great friend and getting to know a lot more about this subject matter. But we have asked for one, but it's going to be very difficult, Representative, because just as he said, we don't know how many or any part of it. So we're just digging around trying to find information to help the bill sponsor.
Thank
Come
you,
up with some ideas. Representative Mathag.
I just thought of something. If my understanding is correct, Zell Miller was designed for excellence, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if we have, and I'm gonna use the word eligible, ineligible, because that's what we're dealing with, that's the criteria. If we've got an ineligible student that's excellent, that student's gonna test very high. Would you agree with me there, or, I mean, okay, you're an educator, so, but I know, in my experience, some of the homeschoolers that I'm affiliated with, I'd put them up against kids in a eligible school 2 grades higher, and they'd beat them every time. Now, that being said, I've got some that wouldn't even come close. So, as an educator, Chairman, can you comment on that? Okay.
Okay, thanks. Well, you can say that ADHD doesn't exist, that OCD doesn't exist, that test anxiety doesn't exist, but there are parents and students who would beg to differ. And so if you start denying a child with a 4.0 a scholarship because he or she has test anxiety and does poorly on the SAT or the ACT, then that child has missed out. So I find it to be very equitable. I find it to be fair that you do have both, because I just think it's a better option.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Would you not agree that it could be the opposite also? Because we've got some kids that test very well and their GPAs aren't.
Sure, yeah.
So it could, I
Here's
think,
my hesitation, is that 6 years ago, I was blessed to be a floor leader and sat at the table when we redid the whole Hope
criteria.
Scholarship, yeah. And we added Zell Miller at that time. And we were looking at, in a few years, being down to no more money. So I'm still very cautious about what we have available and the reserves available and how much we can dip in. And it's not that I'm trying to be unfair to any student. Any student who is eligible, I think, deserves it. But I'm still very cautious about a number, a finite amount of dollars that is in a fund for us to use. And if we don't, today, in this session, if we don't consider that, then in a few years, we'll be back at the table doing the same thing we did when Governor Deal first took office. So opening it up to either or concerns me.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good for your wise comments. You certainly lived through those moments. I remember well. I think Representative Chandler, are you next? Yes, ma'am.
And you may be able to help me with this, but as I remember, when the Zell was begun, the idea was we want to look at the kid who has a great work ethic as well as the kid who tests well. And so, you know, that's why you have both parts of that, because there are very bright kids that are very lazy and will do nothing in high school. And both parts were there to catch. Oh, I'm sorry. Or maybe just unmotivated, I should have said. I'm sorry. But I think that both parts are there for a reason.
They just lack motivation.
You're right. That would have been a kinder way to say it. You're right.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding because of the language in the bill. So, you know, we're feeling the desire to help those of the either or, the one that's got a 4.0, but he's got test anxiety, but he can't qualify under the current language, correct? And we're okay with that.
Correct.
Okay.
But he qualifies
For the Hope.
Scholarship.
Okay.
He just
Right.
does not qualify for the Zell Miller.
Okay.
This is specifically about Zell.
Right.
I have to keep reminding myself in the
Exactly.
conversation that we're talking about the Zell Miller Scholarship, here, not all the other opportunities that are out there.
Very good.
Have somebody else. Representative Mathayak.
when a student gets the Zell Miller scholarship, how long, they have to keep a specific GPA to keep that scholarship, just like the Hope, right, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So either way, if their GPA isn't, if they're an ineligible, no GPA, I know, but an ineligible student wouldn't have a GPA. I mean, there's the crux of it for me. The ineligible student doesn't have a GPA, and I agree with you 100% because the parent would say, uh-oh, it's a 79, I'm gonna give them an 80. I just think that that's human nature. Because we see it across the board. I mean, that's just human nature. But what I'm trying to get at is they would either keep the scholarship because they are bright and can perform, especially in an excellence, or they're going to lose it because they can't perform. Correct? So is it gonna iron itself out financially in the end anyways? So you don't think so, you think we'd still lose financially, correct?
I
Your
think it's the
hesitation is there.
unknown. If I can intercede, I think what the Chairman's saying is the unknown. And what it would do to the very fine balance that's currently in place for the different, as you saw last week, the many different parts of Hope and Zell and all the others, and there's a fine balance of them that's out there. Would that be appropriate? Representative Costas.
Mr. Chairman, I guess once again for clarity, when we're speaking of non-eligible, we're talking about schools that are giving GPAs. They're just not eligible schools.
Yes, sir.
The only demographic or group that would not have a GPA is the home study group. Correct.
Yes, sir.
So therefore, under the language of the bill, subsection I, or 1, I don't know, we would call that small Roman numeral 1, the I, we're talking of grouping eligible high school with non-eligible high school. And both have to produce a 3.7 student with a 1200 SAT, 26 ACT. Under subparagraph 3, Roman numeral 3, the home study student just has to score 1200. Or 26. Correct?
Correct.
So we can't group the home study folks in the non-eligible. That's a totally different. So there's 3 categories here.
Correct.
Eligible, non-eligible, home study. Okay. Very good.
Any other questions? The bill sponsor. And so, Representative Rathensperger, I can certainly tell you that this committee is not ready to move on this, as you can tell the broad discussion across. And I'd like to just, I'd love to sit down with you with a couple of other committee members and just
Okay.
and talk about it some more offline. And I'm just straight up that I don't know that we can move on this. But I think we need to have just those frank conversations where we can just, what can we come to agreement on? Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first time I looked at your bill, I wrote down who's being harmed now. And I think I asked you that in the first meeting. And that's something I want to get a little bit more defined about. And also want to see what support or non-support you have out there in the homeschool community for this. And I'd love to hear from that group. I hope they contact you, not the committee members, in that. And and that's just a warning or a request to you. You can take it either way you want. That that they talk to you and make sure that what they want to know or their opinions of it come to you, and then you would be relaying it to us.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you should be able to sleep, tonight. I am not going to be putting out an e-blast, letting every homeschooler in Georgia to contact Chairman Rick Jaspers. So you can rest easy on that one. I've actually received an email this afternoon from Miss Mary Beth Morris, and she was unable to attend, but she supported,
Please tell who.
and she is she is the Georgia, a member of the Georgia Home Education Association, GHEA. So we had talked, I reached out to her and to other board members of the Georgia Homeschooler Association. So it's a Home Education Association. She was unable to attend, but she felt that for homeschoolers, it did not make sense to have a GPA in there. And she said, actually, if you talk to any of the official folks from the state of Georgia, they would say it doesn't make sense either because mom and dad are grading, little juniors' papers. So that it doesn't make sense for that. So that's the kind of the conundrum that we're at right now. And so they would love to have more equity in this. And I think the language that we have right now, they're comfortable with. But we will reach out to them and we'll take this offline and have more discussions.
And I think committee members, as they have concerns with it, would contact their bill sponsor, and so we can find that place
Well, I appreciate
where many bills find after a great discussion is where we need it for it to be.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this back for a second hearing, sir.
You bet.
Thank you.
Anything else for the committee? And after that, we adjourn. We thank you for being here today. Don't forget the Cordial Fish Fry tonight.